The morning sun cast long shadows across Heathrow Airport as James Mitchell adjusted his red ceremonial uniform one last time. After 15 years of dedicated service as a British Royal Guard, he had earned a well-deserved vacation to visit his sister in New York. The airline had upgraded him to first class as a gesture of respect for his military service, something that filled him with quiet pride. As James approached the boarding gate, he noticed the usual mix of business travelers and tourists. His polished boots clicked against the terminal floor, and his perfectly pressed uniform drew respectful nods from fellow passengers. The gate agent smiled warmly as she checked his boarding pass, thanking him for his service before directing him to the priority boarding line. The aircraft was a magnificent sight. One of the airline's newest planes with spacious first-class cabins. James found his seat 2A and carefully stored his military cap in the overhead compartment. The leather seat felt luxurious beneath him, a far cry from the hard chairs he was accustomed to during his long shifts at Buckingham Palace. As other first-class passengers began boarding, James noticed a well-dressed couple in their 50s settling into seats across the aisle. The woman wore expensive jewelry that caught the cabin lights, while the man sported a tailored suit that probably cost more than James earned in a month. They whispered to each other while glancing in his direction, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something that looked suspiciously like disdain. The flight attendant, Sarah, approached with a warm smile and offered James a pre-flight beverage. Her genuine appreciation for his service was evident as she thanked him personally for his dedication to the crown. James accepted a glass of water gracefully, maintaining the dignified composure that had been drilled into him throughout his military career. However, the atmosphere began to change when more passengers noticed his presence. A man in an expensive business suit leaned over to his companion, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward James. Their body language suggested they were questioning whether someone in a military uniform belonged in first class. The whispers grew louder, creating an uncomfortable tension in the cabin. James remained perfectly still, his training kicking in as he maintained his composure despite the growing scrutiny. He had faced much worse during his service, from unruly tourists at the palace to protesters who questioned the monarchy itself. This was simply another test of his professionalism and dignity. The couple across the aisle became more vocal in their disapproval. The woman, Mrs. Victoria Ashworth, finally called over the flight attendant with an imperious wave of her manicured hand. Her voice carried across the cabin as she demanded to know why someone in a costume was seated in first class. She insisted that proper passengers shouldn't have to endure such inappropriate company during their expensive flight. Sarah, the flight attendant, tried to explain diplomatically that James was a respected member of the British Royal Guard, traveling on official business. However, Mrs. Ashworth interrupted, claiming that anyone could put on a uniform and pretend to be important. She demanded that James be moved to economy class immediately, threatening to complain to the airline's management if her demands weren't met. Other passengers began taking sides, some supporting James while others seemed swayed by the Ashworth's confident assertions. The cabin filled with uncomfortable murmurs as the situation escalated, beyond a simple misunderstanding into a full confrontation about class, respect, and the value of military service. James felt his face flush with embarrassment, but he maintained his military bearing. Years of standing guard in all-weather conditions, facing crowds of tourists and dignitaries alike, had prepared him for moments like this. He would not let anyone diminish his service or compromise his dignity, no matter how uncomfortable the situation became. The tension in the first-class cabin continued to escalate as Mrs. Ashworth's voice grew more demanding. Her husband, Robert, joined in the complaint, insisting that their premium tickets entitled them to travel with people of their social standing. They claimed that James's presence was inappropriate, and that his uniform looked suspicious, suggesting he might be impersonating a real guard. Sarah, the flight attendant, found herself in an impossible position. She knew James's documentation was legitimate, having personally verified his military identification and travel orders during check-in. However, the Ashworths were influential passengers who had threatened to cause significant trouble for the airline. Their complaints could result in bad publicity and potential lawsuits. The cabin manager, David Peterson, arrived to assess the situation. He was a seasoned professional with 20 years of experience handling difficult passengers. But this situation was particularly delicate. The Ashworths presented their case with practiced confidence, claiming they had been insulted by having to share first class with someone they deemed unworthy of such accommodations. James remained silent throughout the confrontation, his military training preventing him from defending himself inappropriately. He understood that engaging in an argument would only make the situation worse and could potentially reflect poorly on the Royal Guard's reputation. His silence, however, seemed to embolden the Ashworths, who interpreted it as admission of guilt. Other passengers watched the drama unfold with growing interest. A businessman supported the Ashworths, agreeing that first class should be reserved for paying customers of proper status. However, an elderly gentleman wearing a veteran's pin quietly voiced his support for James. Recognizing the genuine nature of his service from his own military experience, David Peterson made the difficult decision to ask James to move to an economy seat to avoid further disruption. He apologized profusely, explaining that the airline would provide compensation for the inconvenience. The manager's discomfort was obvious as he delivered this request, knowing it was unfair, but feeling pressured by the wealthy passenger's threats. James stood slowly, his dignity intact, despite the humiliation of the moment. He gathered his belongings with practiced efficiency, never showing the anger or disappointment that burned within him. Other passengers watched in uncomfortable silence as he prepared to leave first class, some feeling ashamed of their inaction, while others seemed satisfied with the outcome. As James walked toward economy class, he passed several passengers who offered quiet words of support and apology. A young mother with her children looked particularly distressed by the unfair treatment, while a group of college students whispered angrily about the injustice they had witnessed. The economy section was crowded and noisy, a stark contrast to the peaceful luxury of first class. James found his new seat between a crying baby and a passenger who immediately complained about the additional person in their row. The cramped conditions were manageable for someone accustomed to long hours of standing guard, but the injustice of the situation weighed heavily on his mind. Sarah, the flight attendant, visited James in his new seat to personally apologize again. She slipped him extra snacks and drinks throughout the flight, her small gestures expressing her genuine regret about the situation. Her kindness provided some comfort during an otherwise degrading experience that challenged everything James believed about respect and human dignity. The flight continued with an uncomfortable atmosphere throughout the cabin. Many passengers felt uneasy about what they had witnessed, while others seemed satisfied that proper order had been restored. The Ashworths settled into their first-class seats with smug satisfaction, completely unaware that their actions would soon have unexpected consequences that would change their perspective forever. Halfway through the flight, James received an unexpected phone call on the aircraft's communication system. The call came from his commanding officer, Colonel Margaret Hayes, who had been trying to reach him urgently. Sarah, the flight attendant, looked confused as she informed James that there was an important call waiting for him in the galley area. Colonel Hayes's voice was crisp and authoritative as she explained the reason for her call. The Queen herself had requested James's immediate presence for a special ceremony upon his return to London. His exemplary service record and unwavering dedication had earned him a rare honor that would be announced publicly within days. The timing was crucial, and his travel arrangements needed to be confirmed immediately. During their conversation, Colonel Hayes learned about the humiliating treatment James had received from the other passengers. Her voice turned icy as she listened to the details of how one of her finest guards had been disrespected and forced to move from his rightfully assigned seat. The colonel's anger was palpable, even through the phone connection. James tried to downplay the incident, maintaining his characteristic humility and professionalism. However, Colonel Hayes insisted on speaking with the cabin manager immediately to understand exactly what had transpired. Her tone left no room for argument, and James knew better than to disobey a direct order from his superior officer, David Peterson. The cabin manager approached nervously when summoned to take the call. His confidence evaporated as Colonel Hayes identified herself and demanded a detailed explanation of the incident. The colonel's questions were precise and methodical, revealing her extensive experience in dealing with matters of protocol and respect for military personnel, as Peterson recounted the events. His voice grew increasingly uncomfortable. He realized that the passenger he had asked to move was not just any service member, but someone of significant importance within the British military hierarchy. The implications of his decision began to dawn on him as Colonel Hayes's questions became more pointed and demanding. Colonel Hayes informed Peterson that James was traveling under special orders related to his upcoming recognition by the Crown. His treatment reflected not only on the airline, but potentially on Britain's relationship with military personnel and the respect they deserved from civilian institutions. Her words carried the weight of potential diplomatic consequences. The colonel requested to speak with the passengers who had complained about James's presence. Peterson's face went pale as he realized he would have to involve the Ashworths in a conversation with a high-ranking military officer. The situation had escalated far beyond a simple passenger complaint into something that could have serious ramifications. Meanwhile, James waited in the galley area, maintaining his composure despite feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the attention his situation was receiving. He had never sought special treatment or recognition, preferring to serve quietly and faithfully. The prospect of his personal humiliation becoming a larger issue troubled him deeply. Other flight attendants and crew members had begun to whisper among themselves as word spread about the important phone call and James's true status. Some crew members who had witnessed the earlier incident looked ashamed, realizing they had failed to properly support a decorated military officer who deserved their respect and protection. The atmosphere in first class began to shift as well. Passengers sensed something significant was happening, though they couldn't quite understand what was unfolding. The Ashworths remained oblivious to the brewing storm, still satisfied with their successful complaint and the restoration of their exclusive environment. Peterson knew he had no choice but to approach the couple who had initiated the complaint. His hands trembled slightly as he walked toward their seats, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only his own professional future, but potentially the reputation of the entire airline in a matter involving British military honor. David Peterson approached the Ashworth seats with visible nervousness, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Mrs. Victoria Ashworth looked up expectantly, assuming the cabin manager was coming to thank them for their complaint and confirm that proper order had been restored in first class. Her smug expression quickly changed when she saw Peterson's pale, worried face. Peterson cleared his throat and explained that there was an urgent phone call from a British military officer who needed to speak with them immediately. The Ashworths exchanged glances, initially annoyed at being interrupted during their flight. Mrs. Ashworth waved dismissively, insisting they had nothing to discuss with any military personnel and certainly wouldn't be bothered during their expensive journey. However, Peterson's insistence and obvious distress made it clear this was not a request they could refuse. Reluctantly, Robert Ashworth followed the cabin manager to the communication area, leaving his wife behind with strict instructions to maintain their position and not allow any changes to their seating arrangement. Colonel Hayes's voice cut through the aircraft's communication system like a blade. Her introduction was formal and intimidating, establishing her authority as commanding officer of the Royal Guard Regiment. Robert Ashworth's dismissive attitude evaporated instantly as he realized he was speaking with someone of considerable military rank and influence. The colonel's questions were direct and unforgiving. She asked Robert to explain exactly why he felt entitled to remove a decorated British soldier from his rightfully assigned seat. Her tone remained professionally cold as she listened to his stammering attempts to justify their actions based on their social status and expensive tickets. Robert tried to maintain his position, insisting that they had simply wanted to travel with appropriate companions, and that the uniformed passenger had seemed suspicious. However, his confidence crumbled as Colonel Hayes systematically dismantled each of his arguments with precise military logic and pointed questions about his assumptions. Colonel Hayes then revealed information that made Robert's blood run cold. She explained that James Mitchell was not just any Royal Guard, but one of the most decorated non-commissioned officers in the regiment. His service record included commendations for bravery, leadership, and unwavering dedication to the crown that few civilians could ever understand or appreciate. The colonel continued with devastating precision, informing Robert that James was traveling to visit his sister before returning to London for a special ceremony. The Queen herself had personally selected James for recognition that would place him among the most honored guards in British military history. His treatment on this flight was not just an insult to one man, but to the entire institution he represented, as the full weight of their mistake became apparent. Robert felt his world shifting beneath him. The colonel's final words were particularly chilling as she explained that their actions had been recorded and would be reported through appropriate channels. The potential consequences included formal complaints to the airline, possible media attention, and a permanent record of their disrespect for British military personnel. Mrs. Ashworth grew increasingly agitated as she watched her husband's face turn ashen during his conversation. Other first-class passengers had begun to notice the unusual activity and whispered speculation about what might be happening. The comfortable atmosphere they had demanded was now charged with tension and uncertainty. When Robert returned to his seat, his hands were visibly shaking. He had to explain to his wife that they had made a terrible mistake, that the man they had dismissed as unworthy was actually one of Britain's most respected military officers. Mrs. Ashworth's initial disbelief turned to horror as the implications of their actions became clear. The couple sat in stunned silence as they realized that their privileged position and social connections would not protect them from the consequences of their prejudice and arrogance. They had humiliated a genuine hero based solely on their own sense of superiority, and now they faced the possibility that their actions would follow them long after the flight ended. Meanwhile, James remained in economy class, still unaware of the full scope of the intervention on his behalf. He continued to maintain his dignified composure, though other passengers in economy had begun treating him with increasing respect as word out of his true status spread quietly through the cabin. The transformation in the aircraft's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. David Peterson, the cabin manager, approached James in economy class with profound apologies and urgent requests for him to return to first class. Peterson's entire demeanor had changed from reluctant compliance to desperate concern for his professional reputation and the airline's standing. James initially declined the invitation to return, maintaining his characteristic humility and insisting that he was comfortable in his current seat. However, Peterson's explanation about the intervention from his commanding officer made it clear that this was not simply about passenger comfort, but about respecting military protocol and proper recognition of his service as James gathered his belongings to return to first class. Passengers throughout economy section began to understand what had transpired. Many offered respectful nods and quiet thanks for his service, while others looked ashamed that they had not spoken up earlier when they witnessed the injustice. The young mother with children made sure her kids saw James as an example of honor and dignity. The walk back to first class felt longer than any ceremonial march James had ever completed at Buckingham Palace. Every step carried the weight of vindication, though he took no satisfaction in the discomfort of those who had wronged him. His training had taught him that true strength lay in grace under pressure, not in revenge or humiliation of others. The Ashworths sat frozen in their seats as James passed by to reclaim his original position. Mrs. Victoria Ashworth's face was flushed with embarrassment and fear, while her husband Robert stared straight ahead, unable to meet James's eyes. Their earlier confidence and superiority had evaporated completely, replaced by the growing realization of their profound mistake. Sarah, the flight attendant, personally escorted James to his seat with visible relief and gratitude. She had felt terrible about the earlier incident and was thrilled to see justice restored. Her genuine emotion was evident as she ensured James had everything he needed and apologized repeatedly for the airline's failure to protect him initially. Other first-class passengers watched this reversal with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Those who had supported James felt validated, while others who had remained silent experienced guilt about their failure to intervene. The businessman who had initially supported the Ashworths now seemed to shrink into his seat. Avoiding eye contact with everyone, Colonel Hayes called back to speak directly with James, ensuring he was being treated with appropriate respect for the remainder of the flight. Her conversation was brief but meaningful, reminding James that his service was valued at the highest levels and that such treatment was unacceptable. She also mentioned that formal complaints would be filed to prevent similar incidents in the future. The Ashworths faced a choice that would define their character. They could remain silent and pretend nothing had happened, or they could acknowledge their mistake and attempt to make amends. The weight of their decision pressed down on them as they realized that everyone in first class now understood the true nature of what had occurred. Mrs. Ashworth finally found the courage to approach James directly. Her voice trembled as she offered a formal apology, acknowledging that their actions had been based on ignorance and prejudice rather than any legitimate concern. Her words came slowly, each one clearly difficult to speak. But her sincerity was evident to everyone listening. Robert Ashworth joined his wife in the apology, explaining that they had acted out of misplaced social expectations rather than malice. He acknowledged that James's service to the crown deserved respect rather than suspicion, and that their behavior had been shameful and inappropriate for British citizens. James accepted their apologies with characteristic grace, though he did not minimize the impact of their actions. He explained that military personnel often face such treatment, but that respect for service should not depend on someone's knowledge of specific ranks or recognition. His response was educational rather than vindictive, reflecting the dignity that had made him suitable for royal service. The remainder of the first-class cabin watched this exchange with growing respect for James's character. His ability to respond with wisdom and restraint rather than anger or triumph demonstrated the qualities that had made him exceptional in his military career. The situation had become a lesson in grace, respect, and the true meaning of honor for everyone present. As the flight continued toward its destination, the atmosphere in first class had transformed completely from the earlier tension and conflict. James Mitchell sat quietly in his original seat, reading a book about military history, seemingly unaffected by the dramatic events that had unfolded around him. His calm demeanor impressed everyone who observed him, demonstrating the inner strength that had made him exceptional. In his service to the crown, the Ashworths spent the remainder of the flight in quiet reflection, occasionally glancing toward James with expressions of continued remorse and newfound respect. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced by a deeper understanding of their own prejudices and the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their assumptions about social status or background. David Peterson, the cabin manager, took the opportunity to learn more about James's service and the Royal Guard Regiment. Their conversation revealed fascinating details about the dedication required to serve at Buckingham Palace, the rigorous training involved, and the profound honor that came with protecting the royal family. Peterson's respect grew with each story he heard. Sarah, the flight attendant, made sure James received exceptional service for the remainder of the journey. Though he consistently deflected special attention with polite gratitude, her interactions with him became a masterclass in professionalism and humility that impressed other crew members and passengers alike. She later mentioned that meeting James had restored her faith in the genuine goodness of people. Other passengers began approaching James throughout the flight, some sharing their own military connections or family members who had served. These conversations created a sense of community and shared respect that had been entirely absent during the earlier conflict. Veterans from different eras found common ground in their service. Experiences the elderly gentleman. With the veterans, Pin spent considerable time talking with James about their respective service experiences. Their conversation revealed the timeless bonds that connect those who have dedicated their lives to serving their country. Regardless of the specific conflicts or periods in which they served, their mutual respect was evident to everyone around them. As the flight prepared for landing, Colonel Hayes called once more to confirm that James had been treated appropriately for the remainder of the journey. She also informed him that the incident had prompted a review of airline policies regarding military personnel, ensuring that future service members would be protected from similar treatment. Through improved staff training and clearer protocols, the Ashworths approached James one final time before disembarking, offering not just apologies, but a commitment to learning from their mistake. Robert mentioned his intention to make a significant donation to a military charity in James's honor. While Victoria expressed interest in volunteering with organizations that support service families, their transformation seemed genuine and lasting upon landing. James was met by airport officials who had been briefed about the flight incident. They ensured his smooth passage through customs and provided assistance with his onward travel arrangements. The respect he received stood in stark contrast to the treatment he had initially experienced, demonstrating how quickly situations can change when truth prevails. News of the incident spread through social media and military networks. Though James himself remained characteristically modest about the attention, his story became an example of dignity under pressure and the importance of standing up for service members who dedicate their lives to serving others. The airline implemented new training programs based on lessons learned from this experience. Weeks later, James attended the special ceremony at Buckingham Palace, where he received recognition for his exemplary service. The Queen personally thanked him not only for his military dedication, but for the grace he had shown during his difficult travel experience. His composure under adversity had reflected well on the entire Royal Guard. Regiment the Ashworths followed through on their commitments, becoming active supporters of military charities and advocates for treating service personnel with appropriate respect. Their transformation from prejudiced passengers to genuine supporters of military families demonstrated that even significant mistakes could lead to positive change when approached with sincerity and commitment. James returned to his duties with renewed appreciation for the support he received from his fellow service members and the broader community that valued military service. The incident had been unpleasant, but it ultimately reinforced his belief that dignity, professionalism, and quiet strength would always triumph over ignorance and arrogance. His story became a reminder that true honor comes not from avoiding difficult situations, but from handling them with grace and maintaining one's principles, regardless of external pressures.